Adam, good morning. Thank you for joining us. And my name is Jie Huang, an associate at Scott Legal PC. Today, we are going to spend some time talking about how an investor can pursue an E-2 visa to set up a franchise business in the US and answer the top questions that come up when pursuing a franchise business in connection with an E-2 visa application. As many of you may know, Scott Legal was founded on an E-2 visa, and the founder, Ian Scott, is currently in the United States on an E-2 visa, so we know exactly what you are going through. So just a few things before we get started. Scott Legal is a full-service immigration law firm. We assist individuals pursuing various types of visas, including family-based, employment-based, but our main specialty is E-2 visas, and we regularly process a high number of them. At the end of this webinar, we will be sending out a few things. First, we will send you an E-2 visa guide, which is a comprehensive guide with the information with regards to the E-2 visa. We will send you a link to where you can sign up for additional webinars in the future, and also a link to this webinar as it will be recorded. This webinar will also be made available on YouTube, and we encourage you to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification button as we regularly upload immigration-related videos. And finally, we will send you a link where you can set up a consultation with us should you require more advice. So today, we are lucky to have with us two panelists, Ian Scott, president and founder of Scott Legal, who has assisted numerous investors in various countries successfully obtain the E-2 visa, who will be answering some commonly found questions regarding the E-2 visa and specifically related to franchises. And today we also have a special guest panelist on this webinar, Adam Goldman, who is a top expert on franchises and is a franchise coach and consultant. Adam has 20 years of experience as an investor, serial entrepreneur, franchisee, and master franchisor, and has a wealth of knowledge to share. Thank you for joining us, Adam.
Thank you.
Finally, for any questions you may have as the audience, you can feel free to add them to the chat box or the Q&A box, and we will try and get to all questions. So without further delay, let us move into our questions. So Ian, would you mind starting us off? Tell us a little bit about your experience with E-2 visas.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, GA. And as you mentioned, the firm was actually founded on an E-2 visa, and I am actually in the United States on an E-2 visa. So, went through, for people who are looking to get an E-2 visa, went through that process. And, after I started the firm, we started taking on a number of E-2 clients. And since the firm has been in existence for over 10 years, and we've processed hundreds of E-2 visas, at all consulates around the world. We do a lot of E-2s in Toronto, a lot of E-2s in London, but we really have, even countries that aren't E-2 visa countries where nationals are not eligible, like Brazil and other countries, we've even processed E-2 visas there. So really do have a wealth of knowledge on E-2 visas. And for the last several years, I have been a panelist on, an expert panelist on an American Immigration Lawyers Association panel, like advanced panels on E-2 visas. So really have a wealth of knowledge with respect to, putting together E-2 visas and advising clients who want to pursue that visa option.
Right. So why don't we start with the basics, right? So who can apply for an E-2 visa?
Yeah, so an E-2 visa, it's a visa that is based on treaties between the U.S. and other countries. So in order to be eligible for an E-2 visa, there has to be a signed treaty between the United States and the country. So, for example, there's a treaty between United States and Canada. There's a treaty between the United States and the United Kingdom, Germany, Italy, France, et cetera, long list of countries. But there are about 80 or so countries that have this particular treaty with the United States. So first and foremost is like kind of a threshold issue before we even can get into the requirements of an E-2 visa. You have to be from one of those treaty countries. And when I say be from, I mean that you have to have a passport from the country. It doesn't matter where you were born, but you do have to have a passport from that particular country. And it's worth noting that two of the world's most populous countries, or the world's two most populous countries, China and India, that they unfortunately are not on the E2 visa list. So we do have some clients from those countries pursuing an E2 visa, but they have to obtain citizenship in another country first, get a passport from another country. So sometimes people will get passports from Grenada. If you pay $250,000, you can get a passport in a few months in Grenada, and Grenada happens to be an E2 treaty country. But yeah, the first and foremost, in order to apply, you have to be a national, have a passport from a treaty country.
Right. So if somebody can apply for an E2 visa, what would be some other requirements to qualify for the E2 visa?
Yeah, so first and foremost, the E2 visa requires that you invest money in the United States. So that's either to purchase a business or to buy a business. So that's kind of first and foremost the requirement. And the investment amount is really going to depend on the type of business that the amount that you're required to invest is really going to depend on the type of business that you're going to set up. So if you set up something like a consulting business, that might require less investment than if, for example, you set up a restaurant or a car dealership or something like that. So that the investment is one big piece. Then the other big piece is the business that you start or purchase has to be in a position to hire U.S. workers. So ultimately, you may not have to have U.S. workers when you first start or purchase the business. However, ultimately, the business does have to be able to support U.S. workers, and that's really the whole reason that the U.S. government has implemented this E2 visa program. It's all about U.S. jobs and creating U.S. jobs. And then probably the final kind of big thing to think about when you're thinking about an E2 visa is an E2 visa. It's not a visa that you can get when you're just thinking about starting a business. It really is a visa that when you're applying for an E2 visa, it's more than just an intent to start a business. You actually have put funds at risk. So your investment, you couldn't just say, for example, take an amount of money and put it in a business bank account and then say, okay, I have a business plan and I want to start this particular business, give me an E2 visa. That would not work, unfortunately. But instead, you would actually have to spend the money, buy the business or spend the money, and really have the business either operational or at the point of operational before you even applied for the E2 visa. So sometimes the E2 can be scary in that sense, in the sense of you have to spend a lot of money before you actually have an E2 visa approval. But that being said, E2 visas are very approvable. They're very as far as immigration visas go, they're very objective visa in the sense of if you kind of follow the guidelines and do what is required, then the rate of success or the chance of success is quite high. So although there is that risk or that necessity to spend before you actually apply for the E2 visa, the approval rates for E2 visas are quite high. So.
Right. Thank you, Ian. That's very helpful. So now let's move on to the major topic of today's session, which is a franchise suitable for an E2 visa?
Yeah, absolutely. We do a lot, and we do a lot of E2 visa franchises, they actually make a very, very good E2 visa. It's something that when an individual goes to a consulate to apply for an E2 visa, and a consular officer is predisposed to think that that is going to be successful, especially if it's a franchise that they've heard of before, because they're going to default to, well, this particular business probably is going to require employees, and they understand that a franchise might be able to provide support to the investor as they come to the United States. So a large number of our E2 visas are franchises, and often when we get clients that set up consultations and they don't know exactly what type of business they want to set up or do, we give them Adam's information and say, well, you could speak to Adam and he might be able to talk to you about a particular franchise. And similarly, I think people have contacted Adam and said, hey, I'm interested in this franchise and I want an E2 visa, and Adam sends them to us or sends them to to an immigration lawyer to assist with the E-2 visas. So I think it's really something that franchises do often make a very, very good E-2 visa case.
Right. There definitely seems to be some synergy there. So why don't we turn to you now, Adam? And yeah, I know you are a top expert on franchises. So let's start with a simple question. How many people have you helped get franchise?
So I've been in the business for over a decade, and I've helped hundreds of people become franchisees.
Right. And what will be some of the common reasons why people would choose a franchise?
So in general, the reason why people choose franchises is, I like the analogy that I use. It's like getting into business with training wheels, right? Meaning you're never alone when you're in a franchise. So you get to be in business on your own without being alone. When you buy into a franchise brand, you get a brand, right? Things such as Chick-fil-A or McDonald's, and you also get a system or process that's helpful. And the reason why that's helpful is that it's hard to reinvent the wheel. And so that's why when people look at failure rates or success rates for franchise businesses, they typically are much higher than people that are starting businesses on their own.
I see. And now, Adam, have you worked with many people seeking an E-2 visa who started or purchased a franchise?
Yes, that's actually become a specialty of my practice.
Mm-hmm. And if someone was interested in an E-2 visa and felt that they had some money to invest, how could you help them?
So what happens is I actually provide a free service to potential E-2 franchisees. The way that my service works is there are 4,000 franchise brands in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
I work with 200 pre-screened brands in 75 different industries. Many of the brands that I work with are E-2 friendly, meaning they accept E-2 candidates. The way that my service works is that first I ask people to fill out a survey. And then what happens is after they fill out that survey, as I mentioned, my service is free if I make a match to the franchise brand that pays a commission, not the candidate. After they fill out this survey, I go ahead and I have them, we have a more in-depth conversation where I get to know them better, because the better I know the candidate, the better matches I can make for them. And then what I do is I come up with these things that are most important characteristics with a 2-page letter model, and just kind of going through these things. There are certain requirements for E2. You need to have employees, et cetera. And then I see these 3 brands that are really the best fit for whatever market they're looking to emigrate to in the United States. And I connect them with those top 3 brands, as opposed to kind of spending a lot of time on Google and not being sure if somebody's a good match or not.
Right. And what could really help people is that you have pre-screened those brands, and then you also have information about those brands that you can share with the franchisee who may not have a lot of previous experience working with those brands.
That's correct.
That's great. So what are some examples of these franchises that you've helped people get?
So let's kind of talk in general about the misconception of franchising. When a lot of people think of franchising, their first thought is brick and mortar, going ahead and flipping hamburgers and being an owner operator in the back, right? Quick service restaurants, fast food, and flipping burgers. What I would say is there are restaurants. That's one of the 75 industries that I connect people with. But the other thing that I would say is the misconception, and Ian can certainly allude to this, is that you need to invest millions of dollars to get a visa in the United States. I am seeing all day long service brands that are $100,000 all in, or even less than that, where people are getting approved. Like, I've never had anyone not get approved for an E2. So I would say right now, especially with a situation with an impending recession, things related to Mother Nature, service businesses are really, really popular right now. And the advantage of service businesses, frankly, is that you can scale them a lot easier than brick and mortar businesses.
Very interesting. And what will be some examples of these service businesses?
So I can't talk about specific brands, right?
Oh, no problem.
But what I would say is, if you live in Houston, Texas, like I do, something that's very popular but not very well thought, not a lot of people think of, is there are a lot of mosquitoes, and the mosquito spraying industry is quite an interesting franchise for the right prospect. It's a recurring revenue model. You have insatiable demand for getting rid of these mosquitoes. And that's the kind of service business that is E2 friendly.
That is very, very interesting. Now, Ian, what are your thoughts? Could a pest control business be good for an E2?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think that when we look at E2 visas, we are really looking at, the investment amount, but then also just the main thing is the business going to be such that viable, such that it could hire U.S. workers. So, and then, sometimes I think that businesses that have, that are very easy for consular officers to understand, or even a business which, no one likes mosquitoes. I think I certainly said no one likes pests, so those types of businesses are good E2 visa businesses. We sometimes have businesses where like the client's describing to me what the business is and my eyes are glazing over because I'm like, what is the business again? But because it's hard to understand what the business is, because it's not something that you regularly see or have heard of. But yeah, so pest control businesses can be great. And the point about service oriented businesses, the majority of the E2s that we do are service oriented businesses. Just an example of a franchise that I recall that we worked on was I don't believe it came through Adam, but it's another franchise that had to do with like a tax, some like I can't remember the name of the tax company, but this franchise, but it was a tax related franchise business, right? So like I don't know, ABC tax, or like I said, I don't recall the name of it. Another example that we've worked on is individuals who have purchased kind of cleaning services franchises, right? So the franchise, they're allowed to buy kind of different areas, like so they would be able to get the clients in that particular area, but pool cleaning services for like franchises, because keep in mind the way franchises are very much it's not just McDonald's, right? or Subway, right? Those are big franchises, right? Big franchises, but they're very much like people who have good business ideas, and then they franchise those ideas, right? Then you pay them a fee, and they do whatever, and give you support and things like that. So yeah, like I think that lots and lots of examples, Just one kind of thing to keep in mind, because the two that I mentioned, two huge franchises. Of course, any franchises can work from an E2 perspective, but one of the things to always keep in mind with franchises is that like any franchise on the immigration side can work. However, there are some franchises that don't permit individuals who are not citizens or green card holders to participate in the franchise. So like Subway is a good example. For example, we've had some clients that call us to set up an interview, or a consult rather, and they're like, oh, I want to buy a Subway franchise. And I'm like, it's not possible. We've had many clients dealing with that with them, and they say that unless you're a green card holder or a US citizen, it's not possible. So there are that's one thing you have to just kind of usually those are going to be the larger franchises, but it's just one thing that people should keep in mind, that they don't want to get so far down the road, because if you're speaking to someone on the telephone, they may think you're a citizen or a green card holder, and then you don't want to get all the way down the road, and then they realize that they can't deal with you because the franchise has rules and policies and things like that.
Right, definitely something to check beforehand then. Okay, so now back to you, Adam. So what will be the required investment amount for most franchises in your experience?
So most franchise brands are looking for people that have, and especially if you're not typically eligible for an SBA loan, you probably need at least between $100,000 or $150,000 to pay for this in order to get in. That's the minimum, I would say.
So 100,000 to what was the
100,000 to $150,000.
150.
And I also want to piggyback on what Ian said, right? So one of the
Mhm.
advantages of working with me is I'm pre-screening these brands. I promise not to give you brands that are not E2 friendly, right? I'm only going to give you ones that are pre-screened that will accept E2 candidates, because you can't really go online and
Right.
type in, is Subway E2 friendly or not? It's more case by case. And if you do it for all 4,000, it's pretty hard to really, it's a lot of legwork.
Exactly.
Right. Definitely can save investors a lot of time by speaking to you. Right. So in your experience then, Adam, do most applicants start a franchise or actually buy an existing one? Because that is also an option, right?
So great question. So I'm not a business broker. That's something much different. What I would say is that 95% of my placements are people that find a brand that's working in some other market in the United States, and they're looking to start it in a new market, right? So it's not a resale; it's a brand new investment in a place. Now, I have done some resales. That's possible, but I think that resales are kind of like a unicorn, right? Meaning, you can overpay for a existing business. If you bought Orange Theory right before the pandemic, you're probably buying it at a really nice multiple. Not sure if it can continue that. You can also underpay, meaning buy a failing business, which you don't want to buy at any price, and finding that sweet niche where the people that are running it, maybe there's a health issue or something like that. That's possible, but it's not as likely. My experience too is that people tend to that are already inside of franchise systems are the ones that pick the best franchises out. So by the time it's available to the general public, it's probably been picked over by people already in the system.
Very interesting. So I gather that there are some advantages to starting a new franchise rather than buying an existing one.
That's correct. That's correct, especially if you're not buying it at the right multiple.
Right. Okay, so maybe we can switch gears a little bit now, and I will turn to Ian. So Ian, then let's talk a little bit about the investment amount. So is the investment amount that Adam just mentioned, which is $100,000 to $150,000, enough for an E-2 visa?
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely is. I think that with investment amount, definitely the government is looking looking to see whether you have spent everything that's required to get the business up and running. So if you if you're doing a franchise, and there's there might be a franchise fee, there might be other things that are required to like, let's say you have a store or something like that, then you might have to buy inventory, you might have to actually lease the space or different things like that. If it's a service-oriented business, it might be a little less that you have to do, but really that you spent all of the money that's required. And if that amount, because usually when you're doing a franchise, they'll give you kind of a list of what they estimate the startup costs are going to be, and if that amount is $100,000 or $150,000, that would work at at a consulate, or most consulates. The problem with the E-2 visa is that there is no kind of set dollar amount, but generally speaking, the $100,000 to $150,000 mark is a good amount. Now, that being said, there are some consulates, around the world that would push for a little higher investment amount, right? So, but as you speak to your immigration lawyer, that's something that would come out in the discussion. We've had some people that, depending on which country that they live in, and which consulate they'd have to go to, well, we might advise them to, so if they were doing $100,000 or $150,000 for the franchise, that maybe they want to put some additional working capital or make some additional expenditures, so that they can bolster or increase their investment amount even over that. So, but in terms of investment amount, we've even had franchises where the individual has invested less than that, and they have been successful. So less than 100,000 even, and they've been successful. I think that the difficulty, and I'll let Adam speak to this, I think the difficulty that most would find is maybe finding a franchise that that is under 100,000 and also is one that's going to be able to support U.S. workers, right? That might be a challenge in itself. But in terms of on the immigration side, if you could find, like, so for example, we've done some cleaning services where the individual has purchased has joined a franchise, had spent under $100,000, had some they have an area or whatever where as clients come in, they get directed to them. And that has been, that has been fine, and it's been a model that's worked in terms of they have, even gone well under the $100,000 mark, and been successful. So so definitely, if if someone has $100,000, $150,000 to spend, that could, that would be great for an E-2 visa.
Great. And to get into the nitty-gritty of the breakdown of that 100,000 or 150,000, how much of that investment would actually have to be spent on tangible things?
Sure. So it would depend on what the amount of money that would be required to get a particular business up and running would be. So if the franchise was, you know, some type of restaurant, for example, and it cost, you know, 200, 300,000 to get the business to a point where it was operational, then you would have to spend all of it. You'd have to spend the full amount. If the, you know, if you were looking at a franchise, let's say it was a service-oriented business, and then when the franchise broke down the cost, they said that, you know, an estimate to get this business up and running was, let's say it was spending 70,000, but then you should keep, you know, 30,000 in working capital to make sure that you have adequate cash flow, then spending the 70,000 would be sufficient. But it really would be, the requirement is that you spend, for lower amounts like this, the requirement is that you spend everything that is required to get the business up and running, and you would do that before you apply.
Right. And so for investments to set up the franchise, would the amount have to be paid to the franchise before, or could investors wait until the E-2 visa has been approved?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and so before, generally speaking, before. However, you could enter into an arrangement where you know, let's say that let's just take an, you know, example. Let's say that, you know, franchise fee is I don't know, $100,000, and it's a business that can be set up relatively quickly. Like, so let's say it's a service-oriented business. So once you paid the fee, that, you know, you'd be able to start operations, you know, relatively quickly after, like within a few weeks or a month after. So then let's say that instead of, you know, let's say someone was concerned, well, I don't want to give $100,000 to them, and if I don't get the visa, then I'd have to fight with them to get my $100,000 back. Then what they could do is that they could enter into an escrow agreement, provided there's agreement, both sides agree, they could enter into an escrow agreement where they use a third independent party, and they transfer the money to an escrow agent, 100,000 to an escrow agent, and then they have an agreement which is signed by all three parties, the franchisor, franchisee, and the escrow agent. And the agreement basically says that, not basically, the agreement says that if the E-2 visa is approved, the money goes to the seller. If the E-2 visa is not approved, then it goes back to the buyer. And so those types of arrangements are completely fine for E-2 visa. Those are considered still at risk. So, you know, there is one kind of possibility to pay and not give the money directly, you know, but it is limited, and you would need agreement, right? Because depending on, you know, which franchise you're deciding on, they may not be, some franchises are more popular than others, right? They may not be willing to wait around until your E-2 visa has been approved. So you have to kind of balance the benefit or the possibility of perhaps losing the franchise, because if they have other people waiting in line, then, you know, they might say, well, I'll just take them instead of you. So.
Right, because not all franchises may be willing to accept that arrangement.
Exactly.
Right.
Because it could be, because at some consulates the wait times are quite long, so it could be a long wait for.
Right. Okay, so if you could share some examples without giving away any of the confidential details, of course, what types of franchises has Scott Legal worked on?
Yeah, so in addition to the ones that, you know, we mentioned, you know, we've done property management companies, we've done, you know, food establishments, like, you know, different types of food establishments. We talked about maid, you know, cleaning services, tax services. I'm trying to think of others that we've done. Yeah, those are the ones that come to mind right now. But you know, there's definitely and they're definitely more. I recall one which was like an oxygen providing company that was doing some franchising. There definitely are more, and I'd say that the food service franchises, there've been quite a few of them, from not the company Subways, but a company that makes submarine sandwiches. I think that's what they're called. Make sandwiches.
Right.
And there've been a number of different ones like that, because those two are very easy E-2 visas, because, you know, you can't have a restaurant or food establishment. Yes, some smoothie bars as well. So just a really wide range. Yoga studios as well. So that they're all coming to me. Yoga studios as well. So yeah, just a wide range of them.
Right. Very interesting. And I'm sure this would give the audience some ideas about what types of franchises they may want to explore. Okay, so now we'll move on to some of the broader questions about starting a franchise. So, and this is the same questions for both Adam and Ian, and I will address both of you for these. How involved does the owner have to be when they start a franchise? And let's start with Adam.
So look, there are all different things on the scale of franchises, right? Some are owner operator, where you can't have a day job, and some are really semi-absentee. There's nothing in the franchising world, in my opinion, that's totally absentee, meaning that it's like a index fund. What I can tell you is that for the E-2 visa, you need to, at least on paper, right, be running the business, right? And so what that means is that, especially at the beginning, I just think you need to be involved in the business. Now, you could potentially hire managers as well, but you got to be prepared to really spend a lot of time on the ground. I don't mean to give you such a vague answer, but because of in my opinion, because of the nature of an E-2 visa where you have to be running it, you really have to be on the ground and running it.
Yeah,
Right.
and I think that's right. I mean, I think that, definitely for an E-2 visa, it's not available for people who want to like a passive investment. The regulations are quite clear about that. So, you do have to be coming to the US to develop and direct the operations. So, and it's another reason that franchises are great E-2 visas, because they're generally conducive to that, right? To allowing the individual, because they provide training programs, they provide different things, and if you plan on doing a franchise and just having other people run it, that may not, it certainly wouldn't work for an E-2, and then there may be other business reasons that's not the greatest idea. So
Right. So you do have to be involved in the business, at least to some degree. Right. Okay. So the next question is, can an investor sell a franchise if they start it and somehow it doesn't work out?
So is that for me?
yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, great. So look, that's, again, I'm going to answer this depends, right? Everyone loves Chick-fil-A, right? Everyone wants to buy a Chick-fil-A franchise. It's very hard to get a Chick-fil-A. I think it's easier to win the lottery than to be awarded a Chick-fil-A franchise. But actually, my understanding of the Chick-fil-A agreement is that it's non-transferable and non-sellable. So you're really not having any sort of asset. Look, I guess the question is how you define not working out, because if you have, just like any business, if you don't have a business that's going great, there's probably not a lot of value there, right? But if you've built a great business that has some sort of value, then you can go ahead and sell that to someone else, just like any other asset.
Yeah, and I think and two things just came to me. Two other franchises that we did. One was a mechanic repair shop. It was a big name, like a bigger name, but mechanic repair shop. Another was a dry cleaning dry cleaning franchise. But I think that for E-2, with selling a business, it's an interesting question where let's say that the franchise agreement permitted you to sell, right? Let's say that you could sell your franchise. So if you were selling the franchise and you no longer were going to be involved in that business, then you no longer have an E-2, because that sometimes comes up where people, they may have an E-2 that's valid for 5 years, they do something, and then they for a year, and then they have a valid I-94 and a valid visa, and they just sell the underlying business and think that for some reason they can just stay in the United States. I don't, and it happens often. It happens often, and you can't do that, right? Like your underlying visa is based on the business that you told the government that you planned on running. So if you sell it, you do have to find some other visa, some other visa, to live and work, because you'd be surprised how many calls we get of people who say, oh, I've been on an E-2, and a couple of years ago I sold my business, and I'm thinking now of buying another one, and what do I do, or whatever. And it's it's an unfortunate situation, but you are required. So if the franchise agreement allows you to sell, certainly. But then if you sell, after you sell, you have 60-day grace period to find some other type of visa, or leave the country, one of the two things. So.
Yeah, and Ian, the same argument would go towards dissolving the company and closing it down if it's not working out, right?
Exactly, yeah, because
Right.
sometimes you can sell the the assets of the business, but you still might have the LLC, the entity or whatever. But yeah.
Right. Okay, the next question for both Adam and Ian is, in a franchise agreement, in a franchise relationship in a business, how involved is a franchisor?
I can start.
Yeah.
So look, just like anything in life, and I know I'm answering this every single question, it depends. So I'm going to answer it depends on this as well. Some people come into the franchising world and they think, hey, I'm going to do nothing. The franchisor is going to do everything for me, right? Meaning the franchisor is going to hire my employees. They're going to find the real estate. I just have to sit back and they'll do everything. I'm just giving them a check. On the other side of the spectrum, I have people that think the franchisor is going to do nothing, right? Meaning you give them a check and they just take the money and they run, and you've got to do everything. The reality lies somewhere in between. You're getting a system and a process. And not every franchise of the 4,000 is the same, right? Some have better support than others. But in reality, you're going to most likely have, if you buy a brick and mortar retail, they're going to help you to find the location. They're going to train you. They're going to help you to find where to find these employees. And so it's somewhere between those two extremes.
Yeah. Right. And Ian, is there any E2 aspect to this question?
Yeah, so it's a fascinating question, and generally speaking, if someone is going to a consulate, we haven't seen any issues because there are some franchises where there's a significant amount of control exerted, where an E2 holder, E2 visa holder has very little choice or say in anything that goes on in the business, and is in essence an employee in terms of the way that the franchise agreement is drafted. Now, in a consulate, we're not too concerned about that coming up as an issue. However, we haven't experienced, but we have heard of situations where an individual that wants to apply for a change of status within the US. And when you apply for a change of status, it's a different process because everything is, there's no page limit. So you would have to include the entire franchise agreement. Like when you go to a consulate, you can select, 70-page limit. You can select the signature page and a couple other pages. But when you apply through USCIS, you have to include the whole agreement, and they go through it, right? They actually go through it. At a consular interview, you're spending 5 minutes in front of an officer that's, making a decision pretty quickly, and probably has spent 15 minutes before that looking at your file. USCIS is going to go through it. And we do warn people that if when they're applying through USCIS, that if the franchise agreement doesn't give the owner a sufficient amount of control such that they can argue that they are actually developing and directing the operation, that could be a problem for USCIS. That USCIS says that they're not meeting that particular requirement of developing and directing the operation. So it is something that, especially when we're reviewing a franchise agreement for the purposes of a USCIS filing, right? That it is something that we actually have raised in one instance where the franchise agreement was a very, very odd situation, to be quite honest with you, where I've never seen a franchise agreement like that. It was a very, very odd situation, the client ended up not going forward with that particular E2, because that one was so egregious that we were actually even concerned that there would be an issue with the consulate, because even the way that the revenue, like it was, it struck me more that the E2 applicant was not going to be doing much, if anything. So yeah, but I think it's something that we look out for, but definitely more for USCIS filings.
Right. So be wary if the franchisor wants to be too much of a micromanager.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. So another question that commonly comes up is, can you expand your franchise or buy more franchises after you start? And Adam, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. Sure. I mean, look, I think the interesting thing about franchises, it's really interesting because every year I have people that buy more than one franchise with me, and sometimes they're not even related. So for instance, this year I had someone that decided to invest in a mobile car wash and a mental health franchise where you are running a doctor's office or medical office. So not a lot of synergy between the two, but I actually believe you can expand your franchise horizontally, right? Or meaning, I'm sorry, you can expand it vertically where you might buy more than one location of something or have different territories, but you can also expand it horizontally. So for instance, if you invest in a house cleaning business, maybe you want to have an add-on business. Maybe you want to also do junk removal as well. And so those two might have synergies, or a painting company. So I have people buy and expand their existing business and buy add-on businesses or businesses that don't even have any synergies all the time.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And now, Ian, what are the E2 considerations that come into play?
Yeah, well, expansion is completely fine. I think that you know, sometimes people have to make a decision of whether they're going to expand within their own the E2 visa entity, or whether they're going to, let's say that they want to, let's say they're even expanding where it's the exact same franchise but in another location. So for legal and tax reasons, they may want to put that particular new location in a new legal entity. And the E2 considerations, I think, are that you're only permitted to work for the entity that you have the visa for. So, but what you can do is you can have a service agreement between the E2 visa entity and the other entity that you set up, which in essence would allow you to work for that entity, or you could just have the new franchise within the same legal entity. And if you did that, you would, you know, there wouldn't be any real requirement if you were. And again, this is talking about expanding the same franchise, right? So there wouldn't really be any you know, requirement to even go back to a consulate or get approval for that. But yeah, but the E2 visa, it doesn't require that you expand. Like you can get a you know, franchise, and you know, if you, let's say that can support equivalent of three full-time people outside of yourself and your family members, and then you decided that you know, let's see, that's all you wanted to do and you didn't want to ever expand the business, that particular E2 could be renewed indefinitely, right? There's no requirement for you to expand, but if you did want to expand, it's definitely you know, encouraged even, right? Yeah.
Right. So it definitely seems like you would want to make sure you have the technicalities right to continue to be compliant with your E2 obligations. All right, so let's now move to an interesting question for both Ian and Adam. And Adam, you can start. What will be the pros and cons of franchising versus starting a new business from scratch?
So look, if we're talking from an E2 perspective, my own understanding through this process is I think it's a lot easier in general to actually get an E2 franchise application approved than it is to get kind of a, hey, I have this business idea and I'm going to start in the United States to get approved, right? I had someone, a candidate that had some sort of background in IT, and when they were kind of going down the idea of an E2, when it came time to kind of get this business idea approved or not, it wasn't even close to being approved. The disadvantage of franchises is, frankly, the question I ask people is, do you want to get a visa or do you want this business to succeed, right? And a lot of times people want both, and that's possible. But frankly, some people just aren't really cut out to be franchisees. What I mean by that is that you got to be the kind of person that can follow a system. If you want to buy a McDonald's and sell gyros and change the McDonald's logo, then you're probably not going to be a great McDonald's franchisee. And so it's a special person that makes a good franchisee.
Right.
Yeah.
Ian, what are your thoughts? Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I just echo the you know, the same thoughts that Adam did. I think that I completely agree that it is easier to get an E2 if you know, all things being equal, if you were to go with a franchise rather than start your own business. The other kind of benefit of the franchise is that, you know, it's a double-edged sword benefit, that, you know, one of the big expenses is the franchise fee, and you do have to invest in the US. And sometimes, you know, if you're starting a service-oriented business, for example, you're struggling to find things to be able to spend money on. So the franchise fee is, is an excellent E2 visa expenditure for the purposes of this. And as I said before, the consulates are very open and really encourage franchises. Even some of the much more difficult consulates around the world, if someone was doing a franchise and applying at the particular difficult consulate, that would be a significant advantage to them, because they are perceived as great E2 visa cases. I'd say on the the downside is, the other side of the double-edged sword is that they're more expensive, right? Like, so you are paying for something, right? You're paying for the fact that someone has kind of carved out the idea, is providing support and different things like that. So they are, they are more expensive, both in terms of the fee that you have to pay, and then initial fee that you have to pay, but then also there are ongoing fees, right? Normally the franchise doesn't just say take a fee and then do what you want. You have to pay fees, other fees. So it is more expensive. So that would be the downside. But in terms of all in all, for an E2, I think they're excellent. It's an excellent option for an E2. Like, ranks very, very high up there in terms of choices. And sorry, one last advantage is that you have to do, like, if the difference between starting a franchise and doing it yourself is there's a lot less for you to do if you start a franchise, right? Like, so starting it yourself means doing everything yourself, right? Website, finding space, sourcing inventory, like, doing everything yourself, all licenses, everything yourself. Whereas if you do a franchise, like, a lot of that, you're going to have assistance with that. So definitely that's something to consider as well.
Right. Thank you so much, Ian. And I get reminded of Adam's earlier comment that it is like having training wheels when you're starting a business, when you're riding a bike.
Exactly.
Right. Okay, so let us see if there are any questions from the audience. I don't think I saw any trickle in. So if both of you don't have any final comments to share, I think this is a good time to close. What do you think, Adam? What do you think, Ian?
No, I appreciate these questions and the opportunity. I think this is a really interesting topic, and just happy to talk about this and to share my knowledge on it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, ditto. I think the same sentiments, and I think that, just to reiterate, I think something we've been saying from the beginning, that franchises are a great option for an E2. When a client calls us up for a consult and says, oh, I'm interested in a franchise, or whether they've picked one or they're looking for one, it immediately is we immediately think of it as a great as a great positive aspect for the E2 visa application. So,
right. Well, thank you very much for your time, Adam. Thank you very much for your time, Ian. This has been very informative to me. At least I learned a lot, and I'm sure it will be to our attendees and to anyone who sees this video on YouTube. All right. So have a great rest of the day, both, and we will close the seminar here.
Excellent.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye now.
So much.